Hello, everyone. This is Glenn Loury of The Glenn Show, bloggingheads.tv and patreon.com/Glenn Show. I'm here with Nikita Petrov. Nikita is a high-level operative in the behind-the-scenes machinations that make The Glenn Show happen. And he and I are going to have a conversation about the workings of The Glenn Show, about how we interact with our audience, and about how we might envision our work being amplified going forward. So I'm kind of turn it over to Nikita to kind of interview me a little bit, and he and I will go back and forth. But the bottom line here is that if you observe this episode, a little bit different from what we ordinarily do at The Glenn Show, you have a much better idea about how you might get involved and about what we are trying to accomplish here in the broadest sense. So, Nikita, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah. And I'm hoping that we will understand a little better what we're trying to accomplish here, because that's one of the goals for me, to, leave this conversation with some pointers as to how we proceed and what kinds of ideas we're looking for. So how do we start? There's a couple of things that we want to announce. There's a special email address that we set up for people to send in certain kinds of messages, and there's going to be a Discord server, like a platform for the patrons to communicate with one another on an ongoing basis. And we'll get into that in a little bit. Mm-hmm. But I think for the purposes of clarity of all of this, for me as well as the audience, I want to ask you whether it seems to you, if my perception is correct, that the Glenn Show recently has been becoming kind of more than what it used to be. It has been acquiring a new kind of quality with, like, when we started Patreon, there's a community started gathering. I've heard you and John talk about the, volume of messages that you're getting in the email, and that's the reason we set up that special email address that we're going to talk about in a little bit. Is that how recent is the change in the volume, or has it been huge for the last years?
No, something is going on for sure. I think in this last year, since the summer of 2020, mm-hmm. the murder of George Floyd, the protest, the rise of Black Lives Matter to an even higher degree of prominence, the global reaction to events in the United States, the sense of a reckoning, the election of Donald Trump and the subtext of racial themes that carried with it. There's a long list of stuff that one could point to here. The continuing negative and problematic encounters between people of color and police officers that create one after another of these viral incidents and so on. There's a heightened sense of, I think, concern about race-related questions, which had been the beat that John McWhorter and I, the black guys at Blogging Heads TV, had carved out for ourselves. So, you're the guy that keeps track of the metrics. My guess is that some of the episodes that John and I posted at the Glenn Show, where we entertained some of these questions and talked about them candidly and, critically, attracted extraordinary attention, 100,000 plus of views at YouTube and so on, much more so than our conversations had been attracting heretofore. So there's a heightened interest in the subject matter. Right. There's a distinctive voice, I think it could be said, that I am bringing and that John and I are bringing. We are not clones, John and I. John McWhorter speaks quite well for himself. He is my conversation partner on a regular basis at the Glenn Show. We talk more or less twice a month as a regular course of affairs. But we have a somewhat distinctive voice. It's a kind of contrarian voice. We're not saying what you would find on the cable news channels or on the pages of the national newspapers and magazines or in the websites that you associate with progressive reportage. We're cutting against the grain a little bit. People who watch the Glenn Show will know more specifically what I mean by that, but it has a character that I think many people, if I judge by the comments that are left at YouTube and at the Blogging Head site and at the Patreon page that we have, if I judge by the reactions of people in the comments, they are identifying something that's unique about the way in which we're talking about these issues, uniquely distinct from the, kind of acceptable, politically correct view. I mean, we cut against the grain. And I think that people are attracted by that. So, I mean, you asked me if there's been a change qualitatively in the nature of reaction to what we're offering at the Glenn Show. And I believe that that's the case. I don't have an exact count, but I can tell you that I could spend all of my time reading and reacting to email messages that I get to my personal account because I use my Brown University email for pretty much 100% of my email traffic. It looks like that's probably a mistake, because I can't segregate. Of course, you have done, and you are going to explain greater length what you have done for the people communicating to us at Patreon to segregate some of those messages out. But there's a lot of stuff that's coming in. People are asking us for advice. People are basically spilling their guts. They're telling us their life stories. They are confessing to us or confirming for themselves that at least somebody can understand what it is that they're talking about. They just need to write the letter. Yeah. And I'm talking about hundreds of people because that's the volume of the incoming that I'm experiencing. And I think John McWhorter could similarly report. So there seems to be a hunger out there. We're national treasures in some of these accounts. We are making it possible for people to go on with their daily lives. We're saving them from madness. They quite literally are saying,
I've seen that, yeah.
I would go mad, but for, the relief that I get when I listen to you guys and so on. So, we're at a particular kind of cultural / political moment, it would appear, in the country here in the United States of America. And on the race questions, modestly, I want to say this modestly. I think that what I've been saying and writing, and what John McWhorter has been saying and writing, and again, I emphasize we are distinct personalities with our own respective views of these matters, has touched a nerve somewhere in the American and even beyond. I mean, we get correspondence from people in Europe and Australia and so on as well. It's touched a nerve out there somewhere, and I've felt a certain degree of satisfaction that we're so appreciated. Of course, there are many who don't appreciate us, but that's another question.
Yeah. Okay. So by way of sort of outlining the trajectory of where we are now and where we might be headed. So what we did, I heard a conversation between you and John where you said those things, similar things to the ones that you said just now. And I guess you just aired the idea right there in a conversation that maybe now that there's some money in the Patreon account, maybe you guys should hire somebody to sort through all of these messages, because even reading them is becoming difficult, let alone answering meaningfully, actually providing some advice if a person is asking for advice and things of that sort. And so what we decided to do as we're trying to figure out what to do with this is to set up a special email address, thework@glennshow.com, that would be used specifically for these kinds of messages that seem to require action on your part, or I suggested that we set up 4 kind of categories that people could label their message with, and those, if I can remember them: work, grow, info, and help. And those refer to work, like if somebody wants to offer some volunteer work, they would put the word work in the title. If somebody has ideas for how this project, the Glenn Show, and your overall enterprise can develop, they should use the word grow. If they need help, because you've been getting these messages where somebody's asking like, I need a lawyer is what I need at this juncture, then they should put the word help in the subject line. And then if there's information that they want to share about what's happening at their place of employment or school they attend to or school their kids go to that is relevant to your beat, then they should put the word info in it. And we've gotten, this is the first time we're mentioning this email address on the Glenn Show, but we put it out on Patreon and in your newsletter at Substack. And so those, not huge venues, but we've gotten quite a few messages. And I was looking at those messages, and it's at looking at, at the time of looking at these messages is that when I realized that something, like I underestimated the scope of this thing. And by this thing, I mean, I guess both the Glenn Show and the subjects that you're discussing.
Can I just interrupt for a moment,
Sure.
Nikita? Because I want to just reiterate what you've said. The email address is thework@glennshow.com. And we ask that people use one of 4 code words in the title or the
Subject
information line, the subject line of their email: work, grow, help, or info. And those are pretty much self-explanatory. But it's a great help to us if people both direct their communications about the Glenn Show to that email address. And if they identify the rough subject that they are writing about with these code words: work, grow, info, and help. So I just wanted to reiterate that. You were saying.
Thank you. Yeah. So we've gotten quite a few messages, and I was thinking of structuring this conversation around those messages. Certain themes seemed important, difficult to address, challenges to deal with to me, and so I wanted to bring some of those to your attention and hear your views on those. And I have some of these out here. Well, actually, before we go into that, another announcement is, since it is still the case that even though there is a special email address and there are fewer emails there, I suppose, than in your personal account, that's still a lot. And it's still a challenge to figure out how to, actually do something about the concerns that people send in. So the next step that we thought of is to set up a platform for people to connect with one another. And we decided we're going to launch a Discord server. Discord is an app that people can use to have group text chats and audio calls and video calls. And all of the patrons over the Glenn Show will have access to this place where they can talk to one another. And part of the reasoning behind that is some of the messages that came into the work at glennshow.com seemed complementary to one another. So one person writes, could you point me to a good attorney? And then another person writes and says, I'm an attorney and I would be happy to help if somebody needs my help. So that is the kind of thing that really, if we just put these people together, they could help one another. That's part of it. And I guess another part of it is, it seemed to me, because as you're saying, some of these people write in and say they've been feeling alone, or like they're going crazy, or that's something that's happening to them. They don't know if that's only happening to them or it's a part of a bigger trend. And so it seems that in just sharing their experiences with one another, getting to understand the situation in a broader scope than their particular locality, there can be a benefit too. So we're hoping that, we don't know how it's going to go, but we're hoping that this is going to be of help. So if you are a patron of the Glenn Show, you're going to have access to this Discord account. We're going to put instructions on the Patreon website. And I'll check in that place, and we'll see whether a productive conversation can be fostered there.
Let me underscore that the email portal that we previously discussed here is open to anyone who wants to communicate with us. But that this community that we're going to be creating at the Discord server that allows for interested parties to interact with each other will be accessible through our patreon.com/Glenn Show page to our patrons at either the $5 per month or the $10 per month tier.
That's correct. Right. So now to some of these substantive things that came up in the emails. Here's one that I was just surprised, I guess. Again, I'm looking at this from afar. I'm in Russia. I have only second, third-hand knowledge of what is happening in America, and our concerns here are very different. Not easier ones, but a different kind.
Well, I am following the news, Nikita, and I did hear about a mass arrest nationwide of thousands of people, 1,500 individuals or something like that. And that made a chill run down my spine. So, keep your head down.
Well, I was at the St. Petersburg protest last night with my girlfriend. We were lucky to not get grabbed, but it is depressing. I'm saying this with a smile because you have to stay cheerful in order to survive, but yeah, the situation is not good. Anyway, your situation is something that I have only kind of vague understanding of, looking from afar. And one of the things that I was surprised to see in the messages that came in is the amount of fear that people have about speaking up, there are cases where it's, there's a decision that's being made at the university, let's say, and speaking up in that context, it takes a certain amount of courage. But my sense is that people are even afraid to, there's a conversation happening at a cafeteria table at an office, and people are discussing, BLM protests or something, and somebody who doesn't have the opinion that the majority of their progressive company shares has a real concern about even voicing that opinion because they fear some consequences. And I'm not sure, my question is, how do you assess the validity of that fear? Do you think, I'll leave it at that. How afraid do you think people are, and how afraid should they be?
Okay, so it seems to me there are two voices that I could use to respond to that question. One would be with a green eye shade on as a social scientist who regards the question as an hypothesis and would look for, the kind of data and the kind of strategy of inference with those data that would allow me to quantitatively address the question. No doubt some of what you say is going on, but the difference between the anecdotes, even hundreds of anecdotes in a country of 300 million plus people, and the reality could be quite substantial. And one just would want to be careful not to make glib generalizations based upon, your own personal or idiosyncratic experience about a matter as important as that. I mean, if I am given, as I am given, to saying that the fear that many African Americans express about dealing with the police is overblown, even though there are instances where things go badly for African Americans dealing with the police without any doubt, nevertheless, a country of 300 million people, etc., then likewise, I should be cautious in making broad statements here. So I don't know is the answer at that level of rigor. It's a fair question, and certainly one would want to have research organizations that do survey research of opinion and so on, thinking about including questions, for example, in the General Social Survey, which is a major private at the National NORC, National Opinion Research Center at the University of Chicago, oversees the General Social Survey. They have a panel of, I don't know, it's probably 10,000 or so people to whom they ask. Americans. It might be bigger. I've not looked at it in a while. They ask, a wide battery of questions about their opinions about politics and social life and so on. That kind of thing. I would hope that people who run surveys of that sort are thinking about trying to expand the set of questions that they put before people to take into account this kind of concern about political correctness, about injury to their reputations, to their professional possibilities or whatever, just to their peace of mind associated with speaking out about sensitive matters of racial content in a highly polarized content. Maybe the person doesn't like Black Lives Matter. Maybe they didn't really appreciate the diversity training that was inflicted upon them by their employer, etc. And they don't feel comfortable saying that. So I hope that serious people take this kind of a question seriously enough to try to provide us with something more than anecdote to assess from a social scientific point of view about the scope of this problem. Are we, in an era of a kind of new McCarthyism? This kind of question. One reads, I wasn't really conscious. I was alive in 1948. I was born that year, but I wasn't aware of what was going on in American politics in the late 1940s and the early mid 1950s. But I understand that there was a climate in some ways similar to what it is that people whom you're referencing are reporting about now, where one just had to be careful what one said about what was going on in the newspaper or whatever. One did not want to get identified as being on the wrong side of that question. Now, people will get angry hearing me compare concerns about cancel culture and political correctness and race with the anti-communist hysteria that swept through American culture and politics in the late 40s and early 50s. And I'm not asserting that they are at exactly the same or maybe even close to being the same things in terms of the intensity. I've acknowledged that I actually don't know. But I think anyone familiar with the historical experience will see echoes of it in some of what it is that we're seeing going on right now. So anyway, part of my response is, I don't know, because it hasn't been measured in a way that I think could definitively address the question. On the other hand, my very strong impression is that, and certainly from the correspondence that I'm getting, which is not a systematic survey, and also from my reading of what's going on, the cases multiply. There's this young woman, Jodi Shaw, at Smith College, who's become a cause celeb amongst the anti-cancel culture segment of American politics, a small segment, but we're still here alive and kicking, because she objected to the diversity training that was inflicted upon employees of the college, and basically has left her job at the college and has gone on a crusade with a YouTube channel and periodic videos that she posts in which she simply gives the account of what happened to her at Smith College. And it is basically, if you're white, you must be a racist and you need to repent. And she's saying, well, wait a minute, why did my race even become a matter of discussion in the context of my employment? This is a hostile workplace where you're asking me to apologize about being white, she says. And there are other things that go along with the Smith College environment that Jodi Shaw has gotten publicly involved in. But I give that as one little example of the things that could be repeated over and over again. A teacher, Paul Rossi, at the Grace Church Academy, which is a private school in Manhattan in New York City, an elite private school that costs $50,000 or $60,000 a year to send your kid to. He's a math teacher there. He was objecting to the woke sensibility that informed the teaching materials on racial issues that were being used in the curriculum at the school, and to the diversity training and the kind of political indoctrination that the staff and the families, the parents of students matriculating at the school were being subject to. Actually, he mentions Glenn Loury in his letter, because he says he suggested to the head of the school that he might want to share some of the writings of Glenn Loury with his students to give them a alternative perspective on how to be thinking about the problems of race and racism. And the school head discouraged him from doing so, saying to him, in effect, Loury being black and talking like this is hardly representative of the sensibility of most black people, and it would only confuse and infuriate our students and others if they were to be exposed to Loury's writing. Why don't you find a mainstream white conservative whom you can share with your students, and you could perhaps get the same point across without confounding it with this black guy. And that has become public. And as a consequence of Rossi making that public, he's in effect been fired from the school. He's been asked to leave the school, his teaching position there, and asked not to set foot on the property of the school without prior consultation with the authorities there, because he's provoked a furious backlash. And one has to wonder, how many Paul Rossis are there out there who are saying nothing because they know that were they to speak up, the similar fate would befall them. Now, this is not exactly a firing squad. This is not, being stoned to death by a mob or anything like that. I think witches are not being burned at the stake here. But the sense that, please don't tell anybody I said this. I write to you anonymously. I write to you confidentially. Right. Here is my report. This is a standard opening paragraph of a lot of this correspondence. So there is something. There is something there.
There's another element to this that I'm wondering about, which is, like, even if the concern that makes people fearful is, overblown. There's not real danger. You can speak up at your progressive company and you're not going to get fired, you're not going to get in trouble, but you still choose not to speak up because you're afraid, and that changes the dynamic of the situation, right? And there can be a bit of a feedback loop. I suppose it's a similar thing with, the fear of cops. If you're actually not in more danger than anybody else walking by a cop car, but you fear the police, and if a portion of the population starts to fear the police as a rule, then that is going to change the relationship between the police and that part of the population and the overall dynamics in the society. I guess a question there to me is, if you're that person, if you're at, you work at a progressive company, whatever, you do go through the training, and nobody at the training says that they're uncomfortable with it, and you don't know how many people actually are uncomfortable because nobody says anything, isn't it partly on you to actually speak up even though you might be afraid?
Well, I smile because this question that you put to me triggers in my mind so many friendly associations that make me smile about things I've read or thought. So there's she may not be living any longer, a German political scientist named Elisabeth Neumann, I think they would say, Neumann. Preference falsification was her idea. This is back to, I think this book was written in the 1960s. But her observation is that because of forces such as those that we're describing here, of conformity, people who may have deviant thoughts from the acceptable line and anticipate that if they express their thoughts, they will be punished socially. Perhaps, again, not the guillotine or the firing squad, but nevertheless, unpleasantness. They keep it to themselves, which makes it impossible for any individual one of them to know whether or not the deviant opinion that they harbor is widely shared. They don't know. And so they think they may well be in the minority and are afraid to express themselves, but they might not be in the minority. And she explores the implications of this. And this idea of hers is taken up by an economist, a Turkish economist working in the United States named Timur Kuran, Kuran. And I think he calls it preference falsification or something like that. He's got a book out there. I can't remember the title of it offhand, but it would be very easy to find. Timur Kuran, Timur Kuran. And he wants to observe that, in such environments, they are ripe for rapid and seemingly inexplicable political change once the dam breaks. Once a few people and then a few people more and then a few people more, encouraged by those who have already done so, begin to express their true preferences. And then all of those, quote unquote, silent majority who have been husbanding their thought and not wanting to share it, feel authorized to do so. And the next thing you know, what had been a consensus has been completely washed away, and you get radical change. Such might be one man's theory of some kinds of social revolution. So those kind of thoughts are triggered in my mind. I do think that there's an interesting strategic issue here, and it's exemplified by the climate of enforced conformity, which I think is abetted. I don't want to ramble here. Let me just finish up. I think it's abetted by interested parties who may well know that the consensus view has deep problems, but who can profit from playing it up. I mean, political actors who can use the tropes and the platitudes and the slogans in order to rally their troops or appeal to some part of the electorate or something like that. Corporations who may see their bottom line business interest as being reinforced by them getting on a bandwagon themselves, and again helping to create an environment that might not be true to the actual sentiments of the populace, but that they gauge to be you want to be on the right side of history. You want to look good. You want to manage your brand, cultivate your brand in a way that appeals to other people, to the masses of people. So if Black Lives Matter and a few outspoken athletes decide that a certain kind of demonstration of their concerns about social justice is appropriate, you may find major players getting behind it just because they calculate that this is the path of least resistance without perhaps having any deep investment themselves. But the effect of that will be to reinforce the larger consensus and to further marginalize people who have issue with it. Something like that. I'm thinking off the top of my head here, but I think if I may just say, Nikita, your humble servant here, Glenn Loury, in 1994, in a journal called Rationality and Society, that's a refereed scholarly sociology journal, published a paper called A Theory of Self-Censorship in Public Discourse, in which I develop, not technically, it's not at all inaccessible to anyone who might be interested in it. It can be easily found online. I develop a sustained argument along these lines, drawing on Noyle and Neumann and Quran, amongst others, in pursuing that argument. So this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. Been thinking about it for a long time. I might just add, and this is somewhat parochial, amongst African Americans, we are only 10% of the population here in the country. I would reckon perhaps not much more than 10% of the viewership of the Glenn Show, if I judge by what appear to be the people commenting on what John and I present. But amongst African Americans, there is enormous pressure to conform around these issues. And I hear from people who identify themselves as being Blacks in the comment section, as well as in my private correspondence, who are very grateful for the presence that the Glenn Show is making in the statements, the point of view that is being espoused, because they feel it themselves, but have felt terrified to say to their friends that this is what they actually think, because it's associated with, disloyalty to the cause to say anything critical of, say, what Black Lives Matter are saying about police violence. But, there are many other racial issues. If you speak as I did in a skeptical tone about the claims of Jim Crow racism rearing its head again in the Georgia election security dispute. There's a dispute about a law in the state of Georgia. It's caused major consternation and some talk about boycott and so on of the state of Georgia because of a law that they've enacted trying to secure elections, which some people allege is a law that is intended to disenfranchise African Americans. And if you question that as a Black person, that's sort of beyond the pale. And yet I have questioned it, and I am a Black person. And I've heard from people that better you than me, but I'm awfully glad you've said it. That is other Black people who also have these questions, but who know how high a price they might have to pay were they to express themselves openly about them. Okay. So I think there's something to that. And I'm not sure how our efforts at the Patreon page can be helpful. Maybe if only putting people in touch with each other, but I don't know.
I have a follow-up on this, and it's kind of like the next question on my list. I had to switch to a different computer with a worse camera, and my mic is not connected, so apologies for that. So we're talking about the fear of speaking up, about the concerns people feel about voicing an opinion that at least they perceive is the minority opinion, and the consequences of that may ensue. There's another question that was raised in these emails at the work at glennshow.com that seemed very, not only interesting, but very important to me. And that is people asking for advice onto how engage with an opinion that they not only disagree with, oftentimes they don't understand how, like, there's, there are ideas that, and there was some person, I forget now whether this person asked to not share any of their details. So I'll just say a professional in a field, and now they're hearing that their entire field is racist, like that science is a part of the systemic oppression and so forth. And I really appreciated in that message, it was not a person saying, how crazy these people are, or I'm angry at being put in this position. This person was saying, I don't know how to start to understand this position. Can you give me some pointers as to how to make this more understandable to myself? And then alongside with that, there are a lot of messages of people asking for advice on how to go about having a conversation without turning it into a fight. And that I think it relates to this like fear of speaking up. It's one thing, it's more scary to speak up in a fashion where you're saying, well, I'm against everything that you stand for, and let's hash this out. If there's a way to speak up in a non-confrontational way, in a way that would lead to a productive conversation, well, that would probably be easier to, not as scary to do. You probably will have fewer consequences you wouldn't want. But then on the other hand, it requires a certain kind of skill, an understanding of how to handle that kind of conversation. So I guess my question for you is twofold. One is, do you have advice for these people? And the other is, do you yourself face that? Like at your university, I assume there are people who disagree with your positions. Are you able to have productive conversations with people with whom you ideologically are very opposed to one another?
Okay, let me respond to the first question first. I definitely am getting this kind of correspondence and query, people asking for help basically at, as you say, I simply want to understand what strikes me as a inexplicable kind of opinion, and I care about the person who's expressing it, but I don't understand it. Can you help me understand it? And also saying, my initial instinct is to disagree, but I don't want to offend our relationship. Mm-hmm. How can I express my disagreement or engage in a constructive exchange with people? They're not asking for cover against being called a racist, I think, so much as they're simply saying, I actually value the ability to have a conversation, but I'm not certain that I'll be able to have one. Can you give me guidelines? You know, what particular sensitivity should I avoid? What strategy, what rhetorical strategy or, strategy of conversation should I engage in? We got this at the Q&A at the Patreon page that John McWhorter and I do. One person asked, how do you maintain the quality of your romantic relationship if you disagree with your spouse or your girlfriend or boyfriend about politics? How can you guys, work it out without damaging the relationship? I've actually been approached by someone I don't want to say too much about because I don't want to betray their confidence, but a person of that we kind of work in the same general academy and the same general discipline and whatnot, asking about in the context of a mixed marriage where one party is white, the other is black, how to get along with the father of the other party, because the father of the other party has a different political opinion about Black Lives Matter, and he doesn't want his grandchildren to get affected by this kind of thing. Yeah. So it's definitely out there. Now, do I have advice? I mean, not really. I faked it at the Patreon Q&A. I came up with some words, but they were off the top of my head. Well, okay, if it worked, it worked, but it wasn't scientific. It wasn't as if I'm somehow suddenly now with a PhD in clinical psychology advising people how to manage relationship problems or whatever. I just talked off the top of my head. So it would be great if we could find a way of helping people through the Glenn Show and our Discord server and everything else that we're going to do, helping people get support from one another in maintaining a sustained conversation with one another about their difficulties, getting it a little bit like Alcoholics Anonymous, where I used to have a problem with alcohol and I used to go to meetings, and we go in there and we talk about not drinking and I didn't drink today. Hallelujah. This kind of thing. A little bit, mutual support. I don't want to get too touchy feely here, but I think it'd be great if we could help people in that vein. Now, as to my own circumstance, this last year, the pandemic has changed a lot about social interaction, which is mostly virtual now. I don't actually see people. I don't see them in the kind of space like at the faculty club where you're going in for lunch and you have to walk past the tables where your colleagues are seated and you have to greet them. And they either smile or they don't smile. They either look you in the eye or they look askance at you. Their lip either curls or it doesn't, and even without words being exchanged, you'd be able to pick up, I'm in bad odor because of that post or that piece that I had in Quillette.com last week, which was beyond the pale and, unacceptable. And now they hate my guts. I'm not getting that because I'm not going to the faculty club or walking past my colleagues at the lunch table or in the buffet line and rubbing shoulders with them and whatnot. I'm basically only communicating with people that I am required to communicate with for, doing my work. And that's more students than it is colleagues. We have faculty meetings, but there's always an agenda in my department, which is fairly clinical. And there's not a lot of time for banter or back and forth or casual conversation. So in this last year and a half, I don't know how with the movement's upsurge last summer and all of the consternation that went around that. And with me being quite active, writing in various venues and expressing what might be for many unpopular opinions, I actually don't know how they've been received by people. I'm not encountering them. More broadly, I mean, I'm not new to the business of being contrarian politically. I have a long history as a Black conservative going back to the 80s. I kind of stopped being as conservative as I was in the late 90s on through the early mid-aughts. But I'm kind of swinging back in the other direction now. I have a long history of being kind of the odd man out amongst people in the academy where I mainly reside on questions of politics. I was much friendlier, for example, to Donald Trump than almost any of my colleagues would have been, even though I was not a Trump supporter. People won't believe me. I was just a guy that said, yeah, I don't know if he has to be a racist. He has views, you know. I was just a guy who said, I don't know if he's crazy. You say he's stupid? I mean, come on, how stupid could he be? This kind of thing. I was a guy who said, well, actually, it did turn out to be a hoax. What he said was a hoax actually did turn out to be a hoax. And I'm not asking you to agree with this, Nikita. These are controversial things. But I'm just saying I'm no stranger to the controversy. And I think, my circle of friends is probably less robust than it otherwise would be. My dinner invitation dance card is probably less full than it otherwise might be. But I'm not actually living in social isolation. And the final thing I'll say about this is that with my students who are Brown University undergraduates, and then there are the PhD students in economics, but some of them come from Russia, Nikita, and they've got their heads down doing their mathematical analysis and our economic theory courses and don't look left or right to get involved in anything political. Not only from Russia, some of them are from China, and some of them are from India, and some of them are from Argentina, and some of them are from Spain. They're from all over, but they're not the graduate students much involved in politics. But the undergraduates are keenly sensitive to every twist and turn in political culture. They are largely on the left, although not exclusively so. And they do push back in my classes, raising questions, and in their papers, as they write, objecting to some of the things that I may have said in lecture. But I'd like to think, I could be deluding myself, but I'd like to think that on the whole, I have their respect, even if I don't have their support for all of the particular points of view that they are aware that I hold. I mean, doing the Glenn Show makes it not a secret what you think. Everybody can look at it, and a lot of people do. A lot of people whom I encounter do. People who might not tell me that they have look at it, and then they encounter me, influenced by what it is they may have seen me say at the podcast. I have to take that into account when I encounter people that I can't presume that they're unaware of the fact that I have particular kinds of opinions. Even so, on the whole, I'd say my relationship with students is good. I don't have any angry remonstration or demonstration in my classes in which people accuse me of having assaulted them by having a particular point of view. They push back when they want to push back respectfully. I respond to them respectfully. We can agree to disagree. I think if I were white, it would be a completely different story. I think if I were a white professor taking up some of the positions that I've taken, I would not be saying this with the same casual, acceptance of what will be. I would be able to report a much more negative consequence for my social life and my professional life. If I were white, I expect that I have a certain degree of cover as an African American. I am somewhat immune from the charge of being a racist, being someone who's just simply on the wrong side of history, more likely to either be accused of simply being hopelessly naive or of being a grifter who's saying this because I know that there's a market niche for a certain kind of Black Afro-contrarianism that I might reflect. I don't think of myself that way. I think I can disprove that claim, but people respond to me either with contempt or with pity, but none of it embodies me being a racist, which I think is the thing that a lot of people are afraid of.
Okay, yeah. So then in terms of actual advice or guidance, I guess this is like you're saying human communication is complicated. We have to figure that out. But then I guess that's a way again to see whether that Discord thing can work out in this aspect as well. I think this is the kind of topic that doesn't have a straightforward answer, that can be addressed in an ongoing conversation. If people are sharing their experiences with one another and their insights and what worked and what didn't work, and give advice to one another, that might be of help. So I don't know if I'm putting too much hope into this, but at least I'm very excited to see how this effort is going to turn out.
Well,
I know.
Yeah. Well, I too am very excited. I was just going to say that I don't think people who may be hearing this at the Glenn Show have any idea of the nature of the contribution that you are making anonymously and behind the scenes. And it's just a privilege to be able to thank you for it publicly, because you're making all the difference in the world on many, many levels, intellectually as well as technically. You're a partner here, making a real contribution.
This is a great opportunity for me. I'm learning a great deal. This is also a little bizarre for me, being in Russia and I didn't know who Ibram X. Kendi was until I heard you talk shit about him on the Glenn Show.
Well, don't let ours be the only source of your opinion about Ibram X. Kendi. Yeah, I do think he's overrated, but that's just me.
But it is like stepping into a portal and, into a different world, different reality. Okay, I know you need to go soon, so let me, I guess in conclusion, just say one more thing that I probably should have said at the beginning, which is another kind of email that we have seen many times now to come into that address, again, it's thework@glenshow.com, is people offering volunteer work. And some of them have here's what I do, maybe it could be of help to you. And some of them say, whatever you need, I have a couple of hours a week or a couple hours a day. And so we haven't come up with anything that we could ask these people to do. And so I guess I'm asking the people watching this if they have any ideas on the kind of help that does not require more work from our side, right? So if something can be crowdsourced, if something can be done, that we put something out there and say, here's how you can help us if you have an hour. If we can come up with something like that, then this whole thing can develop further and maybe quicker. I guess that's my conclusive, thought and conclusion. I had a couple more questions, but we'll save it for a private conversation, I suppose, down the road. I'm hoping this was productive.
Well, it was. I hope it will be productive. I think the test of that is whether the audience found it productive. I certainly did. But at least we put some things on the table. We've given people a place to write to us at thework@glenshow.com. We have a protocol or a set of protocols for how to do that and let us know what they want to say to us so we can sort through it. And we put some things on the table about how we might be helpful. The Discord server will be active in due course and accessible to people who subscribe to the Glenn Show at patreon.com/Glenn Show. And it's very clear that we are trying to be a public service here. We're not just in it for the money, so to speak. And we realize that we have the great good fortune of being a small influencer, a sort of place where people are coming together with common interests, and we want to be productive for the larger good of society with that resource. So that's a message we're getting out to people. And again, I thank you very much for your part in it. And yes, we will have private conversation where we can explore some of these things further.
Thank you, Glenn.
Okay. Take care then, Nikita.
You too.